Welcome to episode 3 of Shadow Support Systems Tech Tips, where we are going to discuss passwords, password recommendations, and how to address them as a whole, and where the source material comes from. When you deal with certain companies, they have guidelines where you must have a minimum of, and then they'll list off some criteria. So I want to kind of go over that. I'm not going to take too much of your time today, but it is a common question asked of me in my professional career, over the past 10 plus years. Well, David, why do I have to pick this password? Why can't I select that password? Why do I have to have such a complex password to access, fill in the blank, the system, right? So where we're going to start off a little bit today is I got a little presentation. I used Gamma to create part of this presentation. It is an AI-driven piece of software to help you to become more efficient, and also it works on your wording. It can establish a giant presentation based off of very little information with minimal editing required on your part. Not sponsored by Gamma in any way, shape, or form. However, I do really like their system and how it's set up, and it does create awesome presentations. I've used it a couple times thus far and been very happy with it. So, without further ado, what I'd like to discuss is first, we're going to go into password length. Do use 16 characters minimum, if not more. I'd prefer more, just because we have a minimum doesn't mean we need to stick to that. Avoid short passwords. So it says don't avoid short passwords, but that's a don't for sure. Don't use short passwords. What I'll do is at the very end of this, I'll go into a password strength meter, and I will type in a short password and then type in a longer password, and we'll actually see how long it takes a brute force attack to crack both passwords, and you'd be quite surprised with the difference. And it's interesting, the organizations that you can go to, they definitely give you a different guideline for these items. And so sometimes the guideline, I'll use Microsoft as an example. Their guideline is 12 characters, but 14 or more is better. Combination of, we'll go through this, but essentially I wanted to take a look at their password character length requirement. They say 12 characters long, but 14 or more is better. I 100% agree with that. But it's always important to exceed that standard. That standard's put there as kind of like a bottom of the barrel, the minimum. And so I never want to be the minimum when it comes to security. We want to make sure we are exceeding that standard. So, like I said, do use 16 characters minimum, but we prefer more, and avoid short passwords. Complexity guidelines are very important too. Include a variety of characters, symbols, and words. These should be uppercase, lowercase, letters, numbers, letters, symbols, etc. Utilize unrelated word phrases for complexity. One of the ones that I like to use an example is like eagle, trap, doorstep. Those three things have nothing to do with one another, but they can be used as a phrase in a password. Don't reuse basic passwords. So password repetition is never a good idea. Just because you have password 123 for your Hotmail definitely does not mean you need to have that password across the board. I would highly recommend not using that password at all. But what I've learned over the course of my career is I can give someone guidelines and try to encourage them and give them factual information and data to back that up. But people in the end are going to do what they want to do. Use of password managers. This has been a growing topic in the past, at least 5 years or so. There are a multitude of password managers on the open market. A lot of them are free. A lot of them are paid. I won't give a suggestion on a password manager. I will say that you should avoid saving those passwords on a browser. If you get to a site and you type in a name and type in your username and a password, usually at the top right of the screen, Chrome, Edge, etc. will offer to save that password. I avoid doing so because all of those passwords essentially get stored, in short, not into some big technical detail, but essentially get stored into a local database of a CSV type file where you can export it to a CSV, but it's put into like a little baby database on your machine that the only thing required to access that is your user password for your user on your Windows machine, Mac, etc. That kind of scares me because that's only one line of defense. You have one password to remember, and if your password is easy to use or easy to know or figure out on your machine, then that person, all they require is that one password to get into that specific file. And that's concerning to me. That's why I always discourage the use of password saving in browsers. Now, for consumption per se, I have produced a list that gives you, here's 18 options of password managers. Like I said, I will not recommend one over the other. I encourage you to do your own research to validate which is going to work for you. I encourage you to read as much customer reviews as possible. Some of these are easier to work with than others. Some of them require a mobile platform. Some of them will add an extension to your browser that will allow you to pull from your passwords. Some of those things are very user friendly, but also some of them I would consider a security risk. So again, here are 18 of the options available to you. There are plenty more, I assure you. But again, won't recommend one over any other. I encourage you to do your own research. Avoid common mistakes. Keep your passwords private. Don't use personal information in the passwords. Don't use the same password for everything. I cannot stress that enough. Keep your passwords private. I've seen this in actual daily work life as far as people write down a password on a Post-it note and they will stick it to the monitor. And so everybody that walks by gets to see that password. That opens up a can of worms that you don't want to open. Someone can walk by, log into your machine, send a nasty email from your machine, and then things go downhill from there. So it's always important to be able to restrict access to your work machine and your personal machine. You don't want anybody messing where they don't need to be messing. That's the most simple way I can put that. Don't use personal information for passwords. Cannot stress this enough. You should not include the name of you, your children, your spouse, your pets, the street you live on, your birth city, any of that information. None of it should be in your passwords, because whenever it comes to social engineering, which I'm going to make a whole video on because it's that much of an issue, people will do enough research on you to find that information out. I remember as a child learning, as a 9th grader in school, I was learning how the password system works. And throughout that time frame, one of the things we were trying to do was to learn how to quote-unquote hack email. And the easiest way to do that at the time was to basically give the answers to security questions. And so some people would put, what's the name of my dog? Well, if your dog's name is Hershey, that's a pretty good indicator that might be used in your password as well. So whenever you have a specific target that these people are going after, they're going to know a lot of personal information about that individual and about that target. These threat actors don't care about you or your belongings. They care about what they can take from you. And so not using the same password for everything and not using personal information is a very good start to making things complicated. Because when it comes to protecting you and yours, you want to make things as complicated, make things as secure and complex as possible. So when someone is trying to, that threat actor is trying to take advantage or get into your accounts, they just simply can't do so. So security caution, I will always caution, to add added complexity, added security protocols when it comes to even just the password selection process. Use prefixes and suffixes for added complexity. There are some items you can add at the beginning of a password. You can use your password phrase or selection of words, and then use that suffix on the end. And that will increase the security of that password, making it harder and harder for a brute force attack to be successful. Avoid sharing your passwords with others. Avoid writing it down and posting your password. I'm going to touch on this twice. I've seen it in my professional world so many times. Somebody writes down that password, puts it on the screen. They attach that Post-it note to the screen, or they'll put it under their desk or on their desk. Or they'll even attach it to the computer, making it super convenient for anyone to gain access to your system in a fraudulent way. So again, avoid sharing your passwords with others, avoid writing them down and posting them in public areas. So phrases and patterns, incorporate unique, personal, but unrelated phrases. I gave you the option earlier, 3 common words that you could use, but in a different order. You can also purposely misspell those words, which will make things complicated for a threat actor to use brute force. I like to use a combination of words But it's important to also avoid predictable patterns. You don't want to use the same password everywhere or use the same password with a different suffix on the end of it. You don't want to say password and then password 123 for Hotmail, password 1234 for your Gmail. Just don't be predictable. In a lot of ways, it's easy to use password generators to be able to be unpredictable. And so for that, I actually have a password generator popped up where you can put in your password length and your requirements on the right here, and then it will easily create a password for you. Now, this password is going to be considerably more difficult for someone to brute force or guess. I mean, this isn't something that you're going to typically come up with your own. This is a completely randomized password. However, it meets the complexity requirements of 16 or more with uppercase, lowercase numbers, and symbols. Now, it's important to let you know that some systems you have a password with are going to have requirements that limit your complexity, right? So certain symbols may be acceptable for Gmail, but they may not be acceptable for Microsoft, or any other website out there may have different requirements. So, of course, you need to read those requirements and take them seriously and adjust your password to suit. So one of the example passwords I like to give people, now this is crazy out of reach for trying to remember this on a daily basis for some folks. However, this does meet that requirement. And so this is definitely more than 16 characters. And it's very helpful. You have a mixture of, you have a prefix and a suffix, and then you have a mixture of symbols, characters, upper and lowercase letters, you have numbers. And so what I want to talk about is the password strength indicator. So passwordmonster.com is the one that I use at times to show this to clients, to show this to people in the residential sector that they just want to make sure that no one's able to quote unquote hack their system. They want to make sure they're protected at all times. And this is one of those ways to kind of see how long it would take a system to brute force attack trying to find out this password. So I tell people not to use the names of their pets, right? So, I have a dog, her name is Bella, right? So Bella takes 0.03 seconds to crack if it's a brute force attack using a computer to do that attack. But what if I add the name of my other dog? So now we're at about 3 minutes, right? So if we take into all the considerations for my recommendations of a password, and we're going to use the password that I used as a recommendation on my presentation, Timmy Tom Toe Touch with a prefix and a suffix, you can see the radical difference between 3 minutes roughly and then 17 billion years. Now, that's not to say this password can't be cracked. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is it's highly likely that this password is going to be significantly stronger than the other password we used as an example. And so social engineering plays a very big role in what we call credential harvesting, where someone will pretend to be someone else that they're not, to be able to get you to give up that information. So that's very important. So as a recap, what we're going to do is, and I'm going to go over a couple documents to give you some help as far as why my ideology is surrounded around security, and saying that you should use these ridiculous passwords. So 16 or more characters as an absolute minimum, mixture of uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Use of phrases that include unrelated words is helpful, like superb eagle contraption. 3 words they're not related at all. And of course, adding a prefix and suffix is beneficial to complexity. Using a trusted password manager, I gave you an example of 18 of those that you can choose from. There are many more. And as said before, I'm not going to make a recommendation on which one to choose. I encourage reading the reviews for those to make an educated decision, because that's what we're supposed to do as an IT provider, is to educate you, not give you 1,700 options, but to educate you to make good decisions in the future, and to make sure that you are reading the proof that they are the best in what they offer, and read reviews. You want to see how other customers have interacted with that product as well, and what their perception of that product is. It's very important. Some are user-friendly, some are what I would consider not very user-friendly. They're more geared to the tech crowd, which is fine, but there's a little bit of a mixture of all of those within that list I showed. Password generators are important also. If you don't really want to have to come up with these on your own, I showed you a password generator provided by LastPass. You put in the criteria that you want, and it will generate a password based off those needs. The don'ts that I want to go over as well: don't use the name of you, your children, your spouse, pet, etc. I kind of showed you to where Bella and Bear are pretty common pet names, but regardless, it's very easy to get that information from a password cracker or brute force standpoint. Don't use the same password for everything. Please, for the love of all things, please don't do that. That makes you extremely visible to threat actors. It makes you makes you an easy target. In this world, you want to minimize attack surface. You want to minimize what someone can do to you from a remote standpoint. You want to limit what they can get to. You want to limit the information that's available to people you don't want to get that information. Don't use your date of birth or social security number in your passwords. A lot of that information people put out on the World Wide Web, on Facebook, social media, etc. You can just go to someone's About tab and you'll be able to see their birth date. It's not very good to put that information out there. Don't share your passwords with people. I've seen that in the corporate world go sideways so many times, where someone is logged into someone else's machine, send out information that they absolutely shouldn't be sending, and of course, the first thought is to target the person the computer belongs to. In some cases, that's not great because that person didn't do anything wrong, but it appears they did, and so it causes unwanted attention, and it's just insecure to do so. Don't write your password down and post it on the computer. I've said that 3 times now. I cannot stress that enough. I've seen it in my career, and it has ended badly for folks with them losing their job, and that's just not where we need to be. The use of browser password savers is highly discouraged because of the way it's stored on your machine. They will claim that this is secure, but at the end of the day, it's reliant upon the passwords that are chosen from the user. So if your password is Bella and Bear, and the only password required to open up that repository for all those stored passwords is Bella and Bear, I would highly discourage the use of that. So when it comes to password complexity and password generators and how we store passwords, there are a couple guidelines and a couple publications that are used to kind of pull that information from. So this is meant for, this as I've stated before in these episodes, this is not meant for your high-end techie who does this for a daily profession. That's not what this is for. However, there are people that could benefit from just understanding how to select passwords, what password complexity is, how to make things harder, how to make them a hard target versus the easy low-hanging fruit for a threat actor. NIST special publication 800-63-3 goes into some crazy, painful detail as far as identity guidelines. It goes into password selection, how you should select passwords, password rotation. It goes into a lot of those things. I'm not going to bore you with reading this to you because it is mind-numbing. However, a lot of organizations in the world, in the country, use guidelines pulled from NIST, these special publications, because it's very helpful. And so, again, won't read it to you. It's boring. However, if you want to go see it, this is the special publication that speaks on guidelines associated with passwords, tokens, passphrases, etc. So today we've discussed password do's, password don'ts, where I've got that information from. Also use some examples from my career to help you out. It's always good to keep your attack surface as minimal as possible, because there are things that we have, cloud information, Google Photos, Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive. There's a lot of data out there that you want to protect, and it's important that you do so. We don't want your memories to be taken away, all the pictures that people store online. We don't want any of that to go to the wayside. And so the way that we protect that is we're relying upon those sources to protect that information, but at the end of the day, your password selection could contribute to the securing of that data, or it could contribute to you losing that data. And so that's what I want you to understand and take away from this is, please be cognizant of the passwords you choose. It is important. It is very important. So please choose the strongest password that the platform will allow, and make sure that you notate that somewhere. But please Don't write it on a Post-it note and put it on your machine. Thank you so much for joining me on episode 003 of Shadow Support System Tech Tips for password recommendations and selection. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.